The Krixal Exchange had been built to feel like the center of the galaxy. Its main auction concourse was a hollow cylinder, kilometers across, lined with tiers of balconies lit in soft gold. Transparent panels looked out on the wheeling stars. Below, anti-grav fields held floating platforms and display tanks like a shimmering constellation. Voices of 100 languages murmured and traded and laughed, washed together with the dry whisper of transaction chimes. On that day, curiosity rather than greed filled many of the seats. A special lot was scheduled. Not rare minerals, not a warship, not a conquered moon. Lot Omega. The lot number pulsed above the central dais in tall, serene glyphs. Underneath, smaller script described the cargo. Multi-species terminal biomatter, fully certified, harvest ready. The words did not explain. They did not need to. Everyone important already knew what the lot contained. In one of the private skyboxes, Vurkash Nerl adjusted the lines of his robe and settled deeper into his recliner. The Thalqar merchant lord was thick-bodied and ridged along the spine, his skin polished to a warm obsidian sheen. Subdermal biolights glimmered faintly with every satisfied breath. He was not excited. Excitement was for smaller traders. For Vurkash, this auction was routine. The numbers were impressive, certainly. The negotiations, tiring. The legal floss work intricate, but in the end, it was only stock. He tapped a claw on the armrest, cycling through projections. Numeric columns hovered in the air. Acquisition costs, projected disassembly yields, distribution contracts. Buyers had already signaled strong interest from across the Oriones Concord. For certain elites, there was nothing better than graphs taken from beings whose original nervous systems had already begun to surrender. Broken minds and bodies, he thought, shaped into something finer. Waste turned into luxury, efficient, clean. His eyes flicked to a small side display, a status feed from the holding sectors, tank after tank of sedated forms. Limbs limp in nutrient solution, respirators hissed. Monitors traced declining vital signs in soothing colors. 80,000 individuals, more or less, gathered from failing clinics and overcrowded hospices on poor worlds. Sold at a discount by desperate local authorities, each one certified by their home physicians as beyond help by standard means. Ethically reclassified, the paperwork said, economically non-viable to treat. Vurkash's ridges glowed a little brighter. The cleverness of that phrase pleased him every time. On the opposite side of the concourse, a docking pylon extended and latched. A comparatively modest vessel slid into place, dwarfed by the hulking freighters and sleek Thalqar pinnaces already moored. ESS Samaritan. The humans had come. Captain Ilias Marko stood in the Samaritan's main airlock as it cycled open. He watched the seals confirm, the pressure equalize, the outer doors part to show the curved corridor into Krixal Station. He had seen battlefields. He had seen triage tents overflowing with the wounded, dirty aid stations hammered together after earthquakes, and orbital hospitals so bright and clean they felt unreal. He had never seen a place like this. Behind him, diplomat Lin Vo checked the hang of her formal jacket and smoothed her face into the practiced calm of someone used to walking into rooms full of predators. She was smaller than Ilias, with a compact, deliberate grace, and eyes that missed nothing. She was not looking forward to this meeting. Their orders were simple enough. Humanity wanted better access to advanced medical fabrication materials. Krixal was where such things were bought and sold in bulk, and the Thalqar Dominion controlled a majority share. The goal was a trade agreement, nothing more. But Lin had grown up on stories of organ harvesters and black clinics. She knew Krixal's reputation. She had argued that someone from medical oversight should come along. The council had sent Ilias Marko. He stepped out into the station corridor, flanked by aides and 2 security officers. The air smelled of polished metal, filtered recyc, and faintly of perfume expensive floral, something designed to seem natural. Lighting panels cast a neutral, calming hue. He barely noticed. His mind ran ahead, sorting contingencies, trade meetings, likely posturing, license demands, the usual. He had not been told about Lot Omega. No one on Earth had, not in any useful detail. It was just a line item in a dense schedule. Observe Dominion Medical Materials Auction. A junior aide hurried up from docking control to guide them. The auction has already convened, Captain Marko. Diplomat Vo. Your presence was requested in Observer Box 1-2. Lin caught the slight edge in the aide's voice. Curiosity, not deference. The humans were a young species in conquered space, their reputation not yet solid. Some thought of them as enthusiastic upstarts. Others, as rural cousins pretending in a city. She nodded. Lead on, please. Observer Box 1-2 was a transparent bubble set into the concourse wall. It gave a wide view of the auction space below. Holographic overlays provided data on current lots, bidding history, and contractual terms. As the humans entered, a few nearby boxes flickered briefly. Other delegates glanced over, eyes brightening. Several exchanged murmured comments over private channels. Interesting. Humans. Here. For this. Ilias came to a halt just inside the glass. Below him, the concourse opened like a colossal theater in the round. Colored light drifted, orchestrated to be calming and to keep viewers alert. In the center, Lot Omega floated in representation, a stylized spiral of figures, each one anonymous and translucent, slowly turning in the air. The projected number beside them made his brain pause. 80,132. His heart rate ticked up, almost imperceptibly. He had to work not to show it on his face. Lot Omega, intoned the auctioneer, a smooth-voiced representative of the station syndicate. Multi-species terminal biomatter, fully certified. Removed from burdened care institutions throughout the Dominion per mutual agreements. Price opening at... Lin's fingers tightened on the balcony rail. Terminal biomatter, she repeated softly, in human standard, not intending to be heard. Her translator bead still picked up the words and softened them into the ambient hum. A nearby Oriones delegate glanced towards the human box. Amused. Ilias did not bother to massage the phrase. His mind translated directly. Patience. People. He tapped a control on the rail, pulling up the lot's documentation. Lines of text and figures spilled into his view. Diagnosis codes, prognosis scales, legal classifications. He read quickly, skimming. A pattern emerged. Each case had a prognosis under a certain threshold of expected survival weighed against treatment cost. Under the Dominion statutes, and accepted by Concord trade law, that made them eligible for repurposing, refined, the fine print said, reclaimed for higher utility. He swallowed. In the holding sectors beneath the concourse, where the air was colder and smelled strongly of disinfectant, Liireth drifted in her tank and dreamed of water that did not taste of copper. The Halcyi had always loved the sea. Her kind had built floating cities of glass and light on the turquoise oceans of their birth world. As a child, Liireth had played in the shallow columns of sunlight, her skin glowing softly as she dove through the beams. She remembered that. She remembered music. She remembered the day her fingers began to tremble and would not stop. The disease had come softly. First, a clumsiness in her hands, a slipping of names and melodies. Then, longer blackouts, when she would wake and find herself in strange rooms. Then the diagnosis, a degenerative collapse in her nervous system, an untangling of the beautiful filaments that made her who she was. Halcyi physicians had not been cruel. They wept as they signed the forms. Their clinics were overfull. The treatments that might have helped were long-term, expensive, and uncertain. With each passing week, Liireth's mind had frayed further. She had agreed to sedation. She had agreed to be of use in some other way, as they put it. Her family had been compensated. They had kissed the cool glass of her tank. They had not told her what would happen to her body. The sedatives ebbed and flowed in her blood now. Through the haze, she heard the distant murmur of the auctioneer's voice, carried via the tank's status link. It meant nothing to her. She was no longer supposed to think in any structured way. Yet her mind refused to fully surrender. Images rose, the glitter of distant stars through glass, the echoing corridors when her tank had been moved. Words, Krixal, Omega, biomatter. Something in her rebelled at that last one. Something small, but stubborn. That small thing, unnamed and inconvenient, would later shape history. In the human observer box, Lynn turned to Ilias. "This is a living stock sale," she said. "They're auctioning people as raw material." Her voice was flat, but that was effort. Inside, anger flared, surprising her with its intensity. She had argued in countless committees about quotas, aid packages, refugee intakes. There were always numbers attached, always trade-offs. She had learned to live with that. She had not expected to stand in a room where beings were described as harvest-ready. Ilias did not answer immediately. His jaw worked. He scrolled further down the documentation. Each individual had a scan, a name, a brief note on homeworld and cultural context. Then, a prognosis percentage and a cost index. All very scientific. He saw a halcyon listed Liireth, though he did not notice the name at first. He saw her neural collapse graph. He saw the words, "palliative care only, no recommended investment." In the trade chat, invisible to his eyes, several buyers discussed optimal slicing strategies. Halsey nervous tissue was prized for certain high-fidelity neural grafts. A particular turn of phrase, excellent material, low consciousness entanglement, made some of them laugh. "The council didn't know it would be like this," Lynn said. "They would never have sent us here to smile and shake hands if they'd understood." She believed that. Her trust in Earth's better nature was not naive. It had been tested, but she knew the shape of its compromises. This fell outside them. Ilias considered disagreeing. Earth did know that the galaxy was harsh, that wealth and survival often balanced on choices that would look monstrous from another angle. But he knew his people's medical culture. They did not classify patients as biomatter because treating them was too expensive. Not yet. "The auction will proceed," murmured the station's liaison, a spindly being in a luminous sash who had accompanied them. "Your presence as observers fulfills the memorandum requirements. Perhaps your markets will participate in future cycles." His tone implied doubt. "Humans could not possibly afford this." Lynn's eyes narrowed. "Participate," she said. "You expect us to buy them? For what?" "Oh, reclamation, I assume," the liaison replied. "Or research. Or resale. The Dominion provides excellent certification. Very sanitary. No contamination with active legal claims. These units are unencumbered," the euphemism slotted together like cold stones. On the central dais, Vurkash Nerl signaled ready. The auctioneer lifted his arms. "Lot Omega," he intoned again. "For the record, 80,000 plus units of mixed species terminal biomatter, fully sedated, disposition rights complete." The projected spiral of anonymous forms brightened. "We open bidding at 3.2 billion standard credits." Numbers appeared, flashing as bids came in. Research consortia, noble households, a private clone shaper from the Rim. They pushed the price up by careful increments, gauging one another's appetite. To them, it was simple. It was a bulk purchase of a rare resource, capital, converted from one form to another. In the human box, the initial shock subsided into a hard, focused, quiet. Ilias Marko's mind, honed by years in chaotic trauma theaters, shifted from moral outrage to problem-solving. He saw the faces in the scans. He imagined them on stretchers, in crowded emergency wards. He imagined doing nothing, watching as they were broken down into parts. "What's our legal standing?" he asked Lynn, his voice low. "Minimal," Lynn admitted. "We're signatories to Concord trade norms, including recognition of Dominion classifications. Earth has not issued any specific objections to repurposing patients certified as non-viable by their own systems." "Not yet," Ilias said. He thought of the Guardian Act, passed on Earth after a long, bitter series of debates. The law had been born from memories of times when humans had decided some lives were too expensive to save, some deaths too far away to answer. The Act had reversed that trend. It mandated that, where possible, Earth must extend protection and care to vulnerable sapients beyond its borders, within practical capacity. Practical capacity. That phrase had cost endless argument. Now he stood in front of a practical impossibility. He looked down at the swirling representation of Lot Omega. His mind ran through rough numbers. How many beds did they have on Samaritan? On the hospital ship Ardentis, waiting in the system for orders? How fast could they retrofit cargo holds into wards? He knew it did not add up. It did not matter. If we buy them, he said slowly, we own the contracts. That means we control their disposition. Lynn turned her head sharply. Ilias, we can take them, he continued. We can treat them. Or try. That's what our law says we do. You heard the prognosis ratings, Lynn replied. And these aren't humans. They're physiology. We brought xenomed teams, Ilias said. Farah is on Ardentis. Neha and Joram are already here. They didn't come to watch. They came to work. He did not mention the other part, the part Lynn would also understand. If they did nothing, if this footage ever leaked back to Earth, if humanity's first major contact with the galactic medical economy consisted of quietly accepting this auction as normal, the effect on their own ethics would be corrosive. Slowly, on the margins, choices would shift. People would say, this is how it's done out there. They would begin to mirror it. Lynn knew that too. Her throat was dry. Even if we had the beds, she said, even if the therapies can be invented, the cost, the Guardian Act doesn't allow us to walk away because it's expensive, Ilias said. It was written precisely to stop that. Someone back home knew this moment was coming. He nodded toward the auction floor. This is that moment. On the main display, bids climbed toward $4 billion. The Thalqar Dominion's own supply branch placed a steady, reassuring offer, backing its merchant lord. Vurkash watched the numbers with lazy contentment. Humans, as expected, remained a decorative presence in the gallery. Then, in the corner of the screen, a new bidder ID blinked to life. ESS Samaritan. The first human bid was small, almost cautious. It simply registered their presence. Several observers chuckled in private channels. One sent a light-hearted message to a colleague. The primates are feeling brave. Vurkash's eyes narrowed, but only slightly. More bidders only meant a higher eventual price. In the human box, Lynn had already opened a secure channel to Earth. Compressed, priority transmission, audio and data. This is Diplomat Lynn Vo aboard ESS Samaritan at Krixal Exchange, she said. Voice steady, only faintly faster than normal. We request immediate advisory on emergency purchase authority under the Guardian Act. I repeat, emergency authority. For context, transmitting attached documentation now. She sent the lot file in full. Known. Scans. Names. The phrases, terminal biomatter, and harvest ready. The answer would not come at once. Not across the gulf between systems. Even on tight beam, even with relays, there was lag. Perhaps an hour. Perhaps more. They did not have that long. Ilias had already authorized the first bid on his own captain's authority. It was within his discretionary spending limit technically. Symbols of intent. We cannot commit full funds without council approval, Lynn warned. Then we buy time, he said. They pushed the price up, bit by bit, enough to delay a closing, not enough to seem reckless. Vurkash, intrigued, allowed the dance. He liked to see newcomers stretch. As minutes passed, interest in the lot grew. The streaming feeds out of Krixal lit with commentary. Many had thought this auction would be a formality, a Dominion internal transaction. Humans, it seemed, had a different idea. In the holding sectors, sedative levels ticked up slightly. Monitors adjusted. The auctioneers did not want their stock to experience distress during prolonged bidding. Liireth's dreams blurred. Yet that stubborn shard in her mind lingered, catching stray fragments of sound. Non-viable, excellent yield. Humans. She did not know what humans were, beyond a word she had heard in passing months before, when new physicians had evaluated her case. She remembered tired faces, frowns. They insist on intervention in low survival scenarios, one doctor had said. Sentimental, wasteful, admirable, some say. But he had never finished the sentence. She had signed the consent form soon after, in a moment of resigned clarity. Now, as the word returned through the tank's thin audio feed, Something like hope moved behind her grogginess, timid and disbelieving. On Ardentis, floating 3 light minutes away, Dr. Neha Ramani sat in the main medical hub and watched the auction through a secure link. Her dark hair was pulled back in a short, efficient tail. Her sleepless eyes were sharp. It had to be this, she muttered to herself. There was no way it was just spare machines and lab materials. Beside her, Dr. Joram Ibanez scrolled through the same files Ilias had seen, jaw-clenching. They're using cost-benefit curves as if they were laws of nature, he said. Look at this one. Survival chance, 18% with aggressive therapy. 18. That's not hopeless. Depends whose spreadsheet you're on, Neha replied. She knew exactly how overwhelmed her own teams already were. Cross-species medicine was a frontier. Every new physiology was a puzzle, and yet her mind was already racing ahead, fitting pieces together. The Genome Crucible designs Bogdan and Farah had been playing with, the open research networks on Earth eager for real xenobiology data, the Guardian Act's funding streams. Her console chimed. Priority incoming from Samaritan. Ilias's clipped voice filled the hub. They're for sale, he said, without preamble. All of them. The Dominion expects us to look away. Then, more quietly, I'm not going to. Neha felt, more than thought, the decision crystallize inside her. This was madness. It was also exactly what she had signed up for. She keyed in her own response to Lynn's transmission, adding medical's endorsement. From Chief Xenobiologist Neha Ramani, ESS Ardentis, she said, Recommendation. If authority under the Guardian Act can be invoked, it should be. Our assessment. Many in this lot are not medically hopeless, only economically inconvenient. We can attempt intervention. We must attempt intervention. Joram added his own terse support. Earth taught us to throw resources at long shots. That's who we are. If we abandon that now, we don't belong out here. Time crawled. The auctioneer's patter washed over the concourse. Bids climbed, occasionally spiking as some consortium decided to lunge. Then, in the human box, a soft chime sounded in Lynn's ear. The compressed reply from Earth had arrived. She opened it with calm fingers. The Council's message was brief. They had seen the documentation. They had reviewed the relevant statutes. A majority had agreed, faster than she would have believed possible. Under the Guardian Act, in situations where sapient lives, certified as non-viable, were being diverted to exploitation and no other entity sought to preserve them, human representatives were empowered to act as emergency custodians. Funds were released. Authority granted. With one condition, reiterated 3 times in the text. Make a good faith effort to save them. Lynn exhaled. Her hands trembled just slightly. We have the mandate, she said to Ilias. And the money, for now. Ilias nodded once. His decision had been made minutes before, but the confirmation mattered. It aligned his personal resolve with his people's will. He opened a direct channel to the auctioneer. On behalf of Earth and the Expeditionary Support Service, he said, ESS Samaritan submits a consolidated bid for Lot Omega, entire lot, no subdivision. Payment on Concord cleared bond, guaranteed by Earth. The number he transmitted stunned even himself. It was an absurd sum, larger than many military procurement contracts. It would echo in Earth's budgetary debates for decades. Silence fell across the concourse, then broke into startled murmurs. Public feeds crackled as commentators scrambled to parse what had just happened. Vurkash's ridges flared in astonishment, then delight. Oh, these humans were even more profitable than he had imagined. ESS Samaritan, the auctioneer said, recovering smoothly. You understand that this is a full commitment bid? No recourse, no refund, regardless of eventual state of the lot? We understand, Ilias replied. We accept all lives in this lot under our custody with full responsibility. The auctioneer glanced at Vurkash's box. The merchant lord considered. He could push the price higher by feigning renewed interest. But there were limits even to the Dominion's appetite. The humans had already gone beyond what most would call rational. If they wished to bankrupt themselves on a sentimental gesture, why argue? Vurkash smiled, showing his polished, blunted teeth. "Let them have it," he signaled. The auctioneer raised his hands. "Lot Omega," he intoned, "sold in full to ESS Samaritan, representatives of Earth." The gavel icon flared and vanished. Transaction seals propagated. In the holding sectors, sedative drips adjusted again. Tank transport drones began to wake. Liireth felt motion. Somewhere in the maze of life support tubing, Nirael, small and shivering on a Selthie-patterned support bed, learned from a murmuring orderly that the buyers were humans. The word meant nothing to her, either, only that she was going somewhere else. She hugged herself, feeling the faint, painful tingling of the parasitic implant that had wrapped her nerves with its glittering threads. It had been sold to her family as a miracle, once. A device that would enhance learning, sharpen senses, connect her to distant relatives across the icy plains. It had eaten her from the inside instead. Her elders had cried when they signed the repurposing forms. They had said their little one would serve the greater good. There had been no other option. Now, workers in Krixal uniforms wheeled her bed toward a docking tunnel, reciting serial numbers to confirm transfer. Nirael watched the curve of the corridor with wide, glassy eyes and wondered which lab would receive her first. In the arrival bay reserved for Lot Omega, Captain Ilias Marko, Neha Rahani, and a dozen others from both Samaritan and Ardentis waited with medical scanners ready. They had converted half the bay into a triage point in the last half hour. Their teams moved with controlled chaos. Carts loaded with emergency support gear zoomed along marked lanes. Portable atmosphere generators rumbled and hissed. Engineers in stained overalls adjusted the settings every few minutes, accommodating new species profiles as they came in. The first tank slid into the bay, cradled on grav pallets. Monitors showed slow heartbeats, shallow breathing, the telltale flat lines of deep sedation. "We'll have to prioritize," Jerome muttered, his eyes flicking between readouts. "Some are closer to collapse than others. We can't wake all of them safely at once." "We're not waking them all at once," Neha said. "Stabilize, then sort. We can buy time before we buy cures." That had become their mantra in the frantic planning between auction and transfer. "Buy time." Nurse Amaka Nwosu raised her voice, projecting over the clamor. "Teams Alpha through Gamma, ready stations for oxygen breathers. Delta and Epsilon, prep for ammonia atmospheres. Remember, you don't touch a tank seal until we've confirmed spec." She sounded like she had done this 100 times. She had not, but she had led emergency wards through pandemics, through sieges and blackouts. The rhythm was the same: take the chaos, hammer it into order. The Krixal liaison appeared at the edge of the bay, nervous. "Captain Marko," he said, "per Dominion custom, we are required to apply property markers to all transferred units and catalog them for potential audit." He held up a device that projected subdermal tags. Small, painless, fully readable by Dominion systems. Ilias regarded it for a long, quiet second. "They are under our custody now," he said. "Under Earth's law. They are patients, not units. This is a compliance matter," the liaison insisted. "Without tags, the Dominion cannot guarantee your ownership in the event of dispute." "That's all right," Ilias said softly. "We're not planning to sell them." Behind him, armored footsteps approached. Sergeant Tain Raukura and his security squad took up a casual but not position along the bay's periphery, weapons slung but present. From the docking corridor, a heavier clank sounded. Droshkan boots. Grumek's contingent arrived in a wedge, their massive frames filling the space. Grumek himself stepped forward, his loader armor glinting, his four-fingered gauntlets flexing. His wide, blunt face was expressionless, but his eyes recorded everything. "We are contracted to protect Dominion interests," he said. "That includes ensuring that assets are properly tracked." Lynn moved to stand beside Ilias. "We have a signed bill of sale," she said, holding up the glowing contract. "Dominion law recognizes it. Under Concord norms, we may manage our property as we see fit." "Even property must be accounted for," Grumek replied, patient. He was not eager for a fight here. Krixal stations did not tolerate firefights in their docks, and Droshkan mercenaries liked to be paid. "Tagging is permanent," And harmless, he continued. It is just good business. He did not care personally about the tags. He had seen beings marked, tracked, and crushed before. He had been paid to do worse. He had also seen what happened to contractors who allowed a client's expensive assets to disappear. Ilias understood that calculus. He also understood that to acquiesce now would be to accept, even symbolically, the classification that had made this atrocity ordinary. He met Grumik's gaze. Then we have a conflict of business practices, he said. Our property will not be tagged as livestock. If the Dominion wishes to contest ownership, they may do so through the Concord. He did not add. Or they can try to take them by force. Tane shifted subtly, just enough that his marine's presence became clearer. None of them raised weapons. They did not need to. The tension thickened the air. Grumik's tactical interface overlaid threat vectors in his vision. The humans were outnumbered on the station, but they were not helpless. And any overt aggression here could void his contract and lead to immediate sanctions, he considered. He had orders to press for tags. He did not have orders to die for them. He lowered the marker device. Very well, he said. But understand, Captain Marko, the Dominion remembers its purchases. If you default on payment, or if any, assets vanish without proper accounting. They will come to collect. Ilias inclined his head. Then we'll make sure no one vanishes, he said. The transfer continued. Nirael's narrow bed arrived on a grav sled pushed by a bored Krixal orderly. The stealthy child lay very still, wrapped in a thermal cocoon that almost hid her thin limbs. Her large, pale eyes blinked slowly. Amaka moved to intercept, her face softening. Hello, she said, switching to the stealthy dialect her translator provided. My name is Amaka. You're safe. We're going to take care of you. Nirael did not believe her. She had heard similar words before, from smiling clinic staff. They had called her Dear One. They had patted her head just before signing her away. What are humans? She asked. Her voice wavered. Amaka hesitated only a heartbeat. The truth, she thought. But not all at once. We are people who don't give up easily, she said, especially on children. Nirael watched her eyes. There was something there she had not seen in a long time. Not professional pity, not weary disdain, but a kind of stubbornness. It did not erase her fear. It scratched at it, like a fingernail at ice. On Ardentus, as transfers continued, the Genome Crucible hummed to life for the first time at full capacity. It was an ungainly machine, cobbled together from repurposed industrial fabbers, medical printers, and a few experimental modules smuggled out of Earth's labs before regulators could finish arguing over them. Under the guidance of engineer Bogdan Myrek and biotech researcher Farah Azmi, it had become something new, a reconfigurable core reactor for life. Farah stood in front of the control console, fingers flying, as she loaded the first HFY neural template. If this melts down, it will be the most expensive puddle of goo in history, Bogdan muttered, watching pressure gauges. It won't melt down, Farah said. It will work, or it will stall, or it will spit something out we'll need to incinerate, but it won't melt down. She sounded utterly certain. She was not. Inside, a quiet terror warred with exhilaration. This was the thing she had dreamed of, a flexible system that could spin out bespoke tissues on demand for unknown biologies. It should not yet have been deployed at this scale. Protocols were incomplete. Safety committees back home would have chained it to a lab bench for another decade. There was no decade left for the beings now filling their wards. The crucible's core glowed. Layers of bioactive gel shifted and reconfigured as Farah's algorithms took hold. Microscopic nozzles aligned, ready to lay down filaments of protein and polymer with nanometer precision. Template matrix loaded, the system announced in a calm, synthetic voice, awaiting fabrication parameters. Farah exhaled. All right, Liireth, she murmured. Let's see if we can give you a different ending. She fed in the Halsey woman's scans, then the human-designed enzyme constructs that Neha's team had tinkered with on the voyage. Machines hummed. Fabrication began. On Earth, in cramped apartments and bright laboratories and crowded teaching hospitals, people began to notice a new data feed, blinking, at the edge of their vision. It contained anonymized scan sets, genetic reads, and urgent notes, unknown species, terminal pathologies, requesting analysis, reply via attached protocols. The feed was not covert. It was not particularly organized. It was just there, open to anyone with curiosity and the right credentials. Some glanced and ignored it. Others, especially the younger researchers and clinicians, dove in. A graduate student in Mumbai paused her dissertation work on human autoimmune disorders to run simulations on Halcyon protein folding. A retired neurosurgeon in Lagos, who thought he had seen his last case years ago, found his hands itching as he examined stealthy nerve maps. A high school biology teacher in Montreal copied some of the data into a learning module and accidentally sparked an after-school group devoted to xenomedicine brainstorming. Within hours, suggestions, hypothesis sketches, and crude treatment models flowed back toward Samaritan and Ardentis, each one tagged with a simple declaration: use if helpful, no credit needed. Humanity's hobbyist instinct, its inability to leave a puzzle unsolved, had just been handed the most consequential set of puzzles in its history. Days blurred. On the Lazarus Array above Caliph Minor, refurbishments that had been proceeding at a leisurely pace suddenly accelerated beyond all sane schedules. Lazarus had been an old industrial frame, half-disassembled wreckage from a bygone war, when Earth had been granted the right to rebuild it as a medical outpost. It had never been meant to hold tens of thousands of critical patients. Now, crews worked without pause to change that. Bogdan orchestrated power reroutes, diverting energy from cosmetic lighting and unoccupied sectors to life support. Panels flickered and died in empty corridors, while ward lights burned steady. Air recyclers were piggybacked and stacked. Some systems groaned under the load, but they held. Neha and Joram set up triage sectors according to species clusters. Data from Earth continuously updated their protocols. They quickly discovered the scale of the galaxy's medical neglect. Here was a Halcyon like Liireth, whose nervous system had been abandoned when a promising treatment fell below a certain investment threshold. Here, an insectoid species whose bone marrow equivalent had been quietly extracted while they were still conscious, their imminent death recorded as natural decline. Here were stealthy children like Nirael, their bodies hijacked by parasitic implants marketed as enhancements to parents who could not understand the fine print. Every chart bore some version of the same verdict: too costly, too complicated, too unlikely. In humanity's wards, the phrase was banned. Terminal became, as Neha said in one late-night briefing, a description of our current ignorance, not their fate. She meant it. She also knows some would die. The first breakthrough came with Liireth. The Halcyon woman lay in a churning bath of specially tuned nutrients and neuromodulators. Tubes threaded into her spine. Her muscles twitched, sometimes in graceful sweeps that hinted at her former dancer's strength, sometimes in random spasms. Her neural scans showed the familiar braided collapse of her species' degenerative syndrome. Clumps of misfolded proteins had choked crucial pathways. Galactic medicine had long since declared such tangles impossible to fully reverse. Neha and Farah disagreed. Human medicine had wrestled with similar tangles before in its own brain diseases. Earth's labs had invented enzymes that could gently nudge misfolded proteins back into order or shove them into cellular garbage chutes. They had never tried it on Halcyon tissue. There were warnings in several Concord advisories about reckless cross-species treatment testing. Neha read those advisories, then weighed them against Liireth's recorded time to organ harvest date from the Dominion files. She felt no guilt as she overrode the warnings. If we do nothing, she told her team, she dies as stock. If we try and fail, she dies as a patient. Those are not the same. They cultured slivers of Liireth's tissue in the Crucible's test chambers, applying enzyme variants and watching under magnification as the protein clumps slowly unraveled. Sometimes the tissue died outright. Other times, it survived, functioning more or less normally. It took days of iteration, fueled by late-night suggestions from back on Earth. A postdoc in Sao Paulo proposed a minor tweak to the enzyme's active site that turned out to be crucial. A lab tech in Nairobi suggested a different buffering solution that made the whole system less toxic. When they finally had a cocktail that consistently repaired the tangles in vitro, they faced another choice: whether to deploy it in a living brain. Liireth, brought into partial awareness, listened to the explanation through a haze. "You were sent here to be repurposed," Amaka said gently, sitting beside her tank. "We acquired custody of you instead. Now we want to attempt something experimental." "Will it hurt?" Liireth asked. Her voice had the drifting quality of someone whose mind kept sliding out of focus. "Yes," Amaka said quickly, before Neha could soften it. "Some. We'll keep you as comfortable as we can, and if it fails, then you will not wake again," Neha said. She did not mention that Liireth's organs would not be harvested. It seemed tasteless. Liireth stared at the rippling lights on the tank's ceiling. "They told me there was nothing," she said. "They told me my only choice was whether to be of use later. I chose that. It hurt my family less." "You made that choice under their rules," Amaka said. "Our rules are different. We want you to decide again, with all the options you truly have." Liireth's lips twitched in a faint, crooked smile. "Humans," she murmured. "The ones who don't give up." It was not something anyone had told her yet. Nirael's overheard description, relayed through gossip and half-understood fragments, had found its way through nurses and corridors. Stories, once loose, moved fast. "I would like," Liireth said, "to dance at least once more, even for a moment. If your enzymes can give me that, even if I die after, it is worth it." Her eyes, still cloudy, fixed on Neha. "Do not hold back to protect yourselves," she said. "You bought me. Use me fully, either as a patient or a lesson." Neha felt a flare of respect and sadness. "We will not hold back," she promised. The infusion began. In the main control room, her team watched Liireth's nervous system in false color. Bright knots of misfolded proteins glowed like tumors. The enzyme complex, tagged with a different color, seeped through her spinal fluid, creeping toward the tangles. For long minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, a knot unraveled. Another followed. Pathways brightened as signals flowed more freely. Liireth shuddered. Muscles twitched in new patterns. Heart rate fluctuated. "Hold her there," Joram murmured, adjusting sedative ratios. Hours passed. By the end of the infusion cycle, perhaps half of the worst tangles had been dissolved or neutralized. Neha resisted the impulse to push further. Patience, she told herself. The brain needed time to adjust. They waited. When they finally dialed Liireth's sedation down, there was no guarantee what kind of mind would emerge. She surfaced slowly, like a swimmer from deep water. At first, everything was blurred. Sound came as smears, light as knives. Then, the world narrowed into focus. Above her, not the bland ceilings of the Halcyon Hospice, but a gently curved canopy, displaying a calming seascape. To her left, a human woman, with tired eyes and a relieved smile. To her right, another human man, older, with a scar down his cheek, watching vitals. "Liireth," Amaka said, "can you understand me?" Liireth opened her mouth. Her tongue moved clumsily. "I remember waves," she said. The words were thick but intelligible. And then, numbers. Your numbers. Emotion punched the air from Amaka's lungs. She leaned in, grinning through unprofessional moisture. "That's fine," she said. "We like both waves and numbers here." Liireth's fingers curled. She looked at her hands. They trembled, but not uncontrollably. "I chose to be taken apart," she whispered. "You chose to put me back together." "Something like that," Joram said. Behind the observation glass, Neha's whole body relaxed. In that moment, the exhaustion, the chaos, the looming specter of failure fell back a step. "She's our proof of concept," Farah said softly. "Now we have to scale." Similar scenes played out in other wards. Nirael's implant removal was hair-raising. It required printing replacement nerve sections in the crucible, testing them, then surgically swapping them in under a microscope, nerve by nerve. It took a team rotating in shifts over 2 days. At one point, Nirael's heart stopped. Joram restarted it manually, cursing, sweat dripping down his face inside his mask. He refused to leave the table. He kept thinking of the forms Nirael's parents had signed, the choice they had been given. Sell your child's body to the labs, or watch her die without even that macabre consolation. He would not allow their last hope, however compromised, to be wasted. When Nirael woke, her first sensation was lack, the scraping, buzzing presence that had gnawed at her nerves since the implant's installation was gone. Her second sensation was pain, but clean pain, surgical pain, surrounded by cushioning meds. Amaka stood over her, eyes red, exhausted. "Hi, little one," she whispered. "That thing isn't in you anymore." Nirael blinked. "I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought I belonged to the labs." "You belong to yourself," Amaka said. These successes, small in the context of 80,000, sent ripples outward. On the news nets of the Oriones Concord, stories began to circulate, first as rumors, then as confirmed dispatches, sometimes grudging, sometimes stunned. Humans who had purchased an enormous lot of terminal patients at Krixal were not disassembling them, they were treating them, and some were surviving. Families on distant worlds, who had signed the forms and tried not to think further, received encrypted messages. One Halcyon family, sitting at dinner in a cramped ocean view room, watched a flickering hollow resolve into the face of a woman they had last seen in a sedation tank. Liireth smiled uncertainly, muscles still weak. She lifted one hand, accomplishing a small, graceful arc. "It is me," she said. "They kept me." The room erupted in sobs and disbelief. The Thalqar Dominion tracked these leaks with growing irritation. On Jur Prime, in a tower of glass and bone, Vurkash Nerl sat before a bank of reports and felt the first real tremor of unease in years. He had, at first, found the humans' act entertaining. Their foolish overpayment made his balance sheets gleam. He had assumed that, after a brief spasm of sentiment, they would quietly harvest whatever was useful and dump the rest, as any rational actor did. But they were not harvesting. They were investing. Worse, they were sharing. Human-designed treatments were appearing in Concord open-access databases, sometimes scrubbed of identifying tags, sometimes explicitly labeled as being adapted from Earth methodologies. Clinics on lesser worlds were already experimenting with them. If enough of these terminal cases could be reversed, then the legal and ethical foundation of his entire trade would come under scrutiny. Vurkash's ridges dimmed, just slightly. He summoned his legal advisor, who appeared as a hovering avatar. "These humans purchased Lot Omega under our law," Vurkash said. "The contract clearly specifies that all biological derivatives of the stock belong to the Dominion. That includes data, tissues, and any knowledge gained from processing." "Correct," the advisor nodded. "Then why are they distributing derivative knowledge without compensation?" Vurkash asked. His voice remained calm, but an edge had crept into it. "That is a breach." The advisor spread hypothetical hands. "They may argue that the knowledge is not solely derivative, that it draws from their own prior experience. Concord arbitration on such matters is slow." "Slow," Vurkash repeated. He stared at a frozen image of Liireth on one of his screens. The headline above it read, "Former Biomass Speaks. I was meant to be harvested. Humans refused." "The market is already reacting," the advisor continued. "Some of our long-term contracts for terminal acquisition are being questioned. There are calls for review." "Let them call," Vurkash said. "In the meantime, prepare formal complaints to the Oriones Concord Council. Accuse the humans of destabilizing regulated trade, violating contract terms, and misclassifying property as citizens." His tone dripped with disdain at that last word. Property became people only when they could buy their own freedom. The Oriones Concord Council convened an emergency session. Delegates from dozens of major polities hovered in their respective holospaces, their avatars arranged in a vast glowing amphitheater. Lin Vo appeared among them, representing Earth. She had not slept properly in days. Behind her calm projection lay a body running on caffeine and stubborn will. But her mind was clear. She listened as Thalqar representatives laid out their case. "The Dominion has complied with all applicable regulations," one said. "We acquired patients only with documented consent or legal guardianship. Their reclassification was ethically reviewed under our statutes and recognized by this council. Now, the humans have disrupted a critical part of our medical economy by unilaterally redefining these units as persons again. Another delegate from a neutral trade alliance chimed in, and they are releasing advanced therapy protocols without oversight, risking biosafety incidents in less regulated clinics. Around the circle, others nodded. Some were truly concerned about biosafety. Others saw an opportunity to restrain a rising competitor. When it was Lynn's turn, she spoke without embellishment. Earth acknowledges that we purchased Lot Omega under existing Concord trade rules, she said. We do not dispute the text of the contract. We dispute the premise that sapient beings can be permanently reclassified as biomatter because it is inconvenient to treat them. A murmur swept the assembly. Your own charters, Lynn continued, speak of the rights of sapience. You draw lines imperfectly, perhaps, but they exist between those who may be bought and sold and those who may not. The Dominion's practice of reclassifying patients who cross an economic threshold is a way of slipping sentience across that line unnoticed. A Concord official cleared his throat. Human delegate, with respect, every major power has some version of triage. Resources are finite. Choices must be made. I am not arguing against triage, Lynn said. We make terrible choices too. Our law, the Guardian Act, was written because we once abandoned distant lives as not our problem. We decided we would no longer do that. Here, we are asking you to acknowledge that a being does not cease to be a person when their treatment becomes expensive. A Thalqar lawyer cut in, exasperated. You speak in moral absolutes. The contract in question specifies. The contract, Lynn said, her voice cooling, is with us. It gives us disposition rights. Under our law, disposition means treatment and protection where feasible. We are fulfilling our side. If your complaint is that we are not extracting the value you expected, that is a matter for your economists, not this council. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others watched, intrigued. They had seen the public reaction to the stories leaking out of the Lazarus Array. Their own citizens were beginning to ask pointed questions. Then you will absorb the cost of these patients indefinitely? One asked. And what of future lots? What of worlds already tied into Dominion healthcare infrastructure? You cannot treat everyone. Lynn did not pretend otherwise. We cannot treat everyone, she agreed. Not alone. But we can start by refusing to profit from harvest, and by sharing what we learn so that others can do the same. The session bogged down in procedural points. Committees were formed. No clear ruling emerged. The Concord would not openly support the Dominion's more brutal practices, not with so many eyes on them, but neither would they strip one of their pillars of economic power overnight. By failing to choose, they left a door open. The Thalqar read that gap as permission. Within days, enforcement fleets were en route to Calith Minor. From the Lazarus Array's observation dome, Tane Raukura watched their signatures grow on the tactical display. We are badly outclassed, he said. The Thalqar ships were sleek, heavily armed, bristling with turrets. Droshkan troop carriers lumbered in their wake. Smaller mercenary craft darted like pilot fish. Understood, Ilias said. He stood beside Tane, not looking at the display, but at the curve of Calith Minor beneath them. The moon's surface was mostly barren, dotted with a few scattered habitats and the skeletal beginnings of a convalescent complex. Inside the array, 80,000 and more beings clung to life. Many were still in critical condition. Moving them was out of the question. They'll demand we hand everyone back, Tane said, or at least grant access to their recovery teams. And if we refuse? Ilias asked, though he already knew. Tane did not bother to answer. What's our defensive capacity? Ilias continued. We can harden outer hulls, reroute shield power from non-essential sectors, Tane said. Bogdan thinks he can coax some extra life out of the old gun batteries. But this station was never designed to fight. So we don't fight the way they expect, Ilias said. He had no illusions. Any open battle would end in annihilation. His task was not to win, but to survive long enough for the political tide to turn. Focus on making boarding actions as difficult and messy as possible, he said. No lethal force unless absolutely necessary. We can't afford to become the monsters they say we are. Tane nodded. He understood the strategic as well as the moral logic. Images of human Marines slaughtering Droshkan mercenaries in wards full of fragile patients would play badly across conquered space. They had to demonstrate, even under siege, that their primary goal remained care. He left to coordinate with his teams. In the Array's main medical hub, Neha and Farah watched the same incoming vectors. "We should accelerate treatments," Farah said. "Get as many patients as possible out of acute care, if there's decompression or power outages." "I know," Neha said. They began pushing the Genome Crucible harder, shortening rest cycles for staff and machines alike. The Crucible protested with increasing errors. Biological material had limits. So did the people handling it. They rode those limits, like razor edges. When the Thalqar fleet took up position around Caliph Minor, they did so with ritualized precision. Broadcasts went out on all frequencies, their tone formal. "Lazarus Array. This is Official Enforcement Detachment, Karin of the Thalqar Dominion," the lead captain announced. "You are harboring Dominion assets obtained under Contract Omega and subsequent acquisitions. You are in breach of derivative property clauses. Surrender all units immediately for collection and legal review." On every channel, similar messages repeated, dressed in legal language but carrying an unmistakable threat. "We acknowledge your transmission," Lin replied from the Array's comm center. "We dispute your classification of the individuals in our care. Under our jurisdiction, they are patients. We will not surrender them to be dismantled." "Your jurisdiction is disputed," the Thalqar captain said. "Coordinate with Dominion representatives aboard. We have lawful means to enforce transfer." There was a pause. No one on the Thalqar side said the words blockaded, boarded, or attacked. Those would have made the Concord observers twitchy. Instead, they began safety inspections. Small craft approached the Array under the pretense of ensuring its compliance with basic operational standards under siege conditions. Tane met their first boarding party at Airlock 3. Grumick led the team, his armor upgraded since Krixal with heavier plating and new identification marks. His expression had not changed. "Sergeant Raukura," he said, "we are here to inspect for dangerous biohazards and unauthorized weapons. Under Concord siege protocols, such inspections are permitted." Tane, in less ostentatious armor, held a pad, displaying the relevant statutes. "True," he said. "Inspections are allowed. Confiscation of patients is not." Grumick's jaw tightened. "No one mentioned confiscation," he said. "Then your inspection team can stay in designated corridors," Tane replied. "And you can keep your hands off anyone waiting in a bed." Behind Tane, bulkhead partitions had been arranged like a maze, channeling potential boarders through narrow, monitored routes. Overhead, vents and spray nozzles waited to release non-lethal aerosols. At certain junctions, the floor plating could be made slick on command. It was a playground of unpleasant surprises. Grumick's scanners flagged these modifications. He appreciated the work in a grudging way. The humans had made the station as unfriendly as possible to invaders without turning it into a death trap. He stepped inside. Initial inspections were exactly that. Careful, outwardly polite, both sides testing each other's reactions. Concord observers watched through shared feeds, commentating on whether either party was violating siege norms. Then someone on the Thalqar command staff decided that assertive measures were needed. It began with a boarding team that pushed past a clearly marked boundary, storming into a recovery ward for the better mended. A Droshkan trooper grabbed a panicking patient, a small, feathered being from a species whose name the trooper could not pronounce, and tried to haul them toward the exit. Tane's Marines responded instantly, deploying a low-frequency sonic pulse that knocked the Droshkan off balance without harming the smaller patient. A net of expanding foam buried the trooper to the waist. The patient scuttled free. The incident, caught on a dozen cameras, was transmitted almost live to the Concord channels. Droshkan leaders rumbled angrily. Thalqar legal advisors sent sharp notes. Humans replied with footage of prior lines being crossed. Tension escalated. For the Thalqar, each moment that humans held onto the former assets and publicized their resistance threatened their market position. For the humans, each hour that the blockade tightened threatened their fragile medical systems. Lin, Neha, Ilias, and Tane huddled in the Array's planning room, ringed by holographic displays. "We can't hold indefinitely," Tane said. "They'll find a pretext sooner or later to cut power, to jam life support, to claim an accident." "We don't need to hold indefinitely," Lin replied. "We need to win the story fast enough that the Concord is forced to choose a side." "Story doesn't stop bullets," Bogdan muttered over the link. He was skin-deep in the station's guts, patching leaks. "No," Lin agreed, "but it decides who gets blamed for the bodies afterward." She looked at Farah. "How close are we on the comprehensive data pack?" Farah, eyes bloodshot, called up a massive spinning lattice of files. "Everything we've learned so far," she said. "Treatment protocols for all major categories of what they call terminal. Scans, case studies, worst failures included. If we push this now, anybody with a third-rate Faber can start copying our work within a week. It'll destroy the Dominion's leverage," Neha said, quietly. "If every clinic can do what we do, there's no justification for their acquisition of hopeless cases. It'll also mean a lot of people experimenting with therapies they barely understand," Farah added. "Some will die because of that." "They're already dying," Joram said. "At least this way, some live." Ilias nodded. He saw the ugliness. He also saw no better alternative. "Send it," he said, "to everyone. Don't gate it through Concord channels. They'll bury it in committee. Dump it on public nets, research networks, pirates forums, wherever you can." Farah grinned, a fierce, tired thing. "You just told a scientist to share her toys with no restrictions. I hope you realize there's no taking this back." "I don't want it back," Ilias said. While Farah compiled and dispatched the data, Lin worked to line up another shot across the Dominion's bow. She had Liireth and Nirael brought to a small recording studio. Both protested. Both were exhausted from their own treatments and recoveries. But when Lin explained what was being asked, they agreed. Liireth appeared as a holopresence before the Oriones Council and on public channels, her bioluminescent skin dimmer than it once had been, but her eyes steady. "I was classified as terminal," she said, her voice echoing. "My family was told that further treatment was a waste. They were offered compensation if they signed my body over as resource stock. They were promised I would be used to help others live longer." She let the words hang. "They were not told," she continued, "that my mind would be erased first, that my remaining days would be used not for care, but for carving. Humans acquired me, along with many others. They did not cut. They did not harvest. They treated me. I can speak to you now because they refused to agree that the word terminal meant disposable." Across the galaxy, some viewers scoffed. Some seized on her as propaganda. Many cried. Nirael followed. Her young voice trembled, but she chose to show the faint web of surgical scars along her spine, the marks left by the implant's removal. "My parents bought me a miracle," she said. "It ate me instead. When I failed my tests, when I began to shake, the doctors said they could not risk trying to fix me. They said it cost too much. They told my parents that if they signed me over, others might benefit from my body." She swallowed. "I don't remember what I said then. I was afraid. Humans came later. They were afraid too. But they cut me open anyway. They said the cost of doing nothing was worse." Her phrasing was imperfect. She had learned bits of human idiom from Amaka. It did not matter. The meaning was clear. The Thalqar response was icy. "This emotional manipulation," one of their spokespeople said on a counter-broadcast, "ignores the realities of resource management. For every Liireth, there are thousands for whom treatment would simply prolong suffering with no meaningful improvement. Our systems are designed to maximize overall benefit." An analyst on a neutral channel played footage of Liireth slowly twirling in a rehabilitation pool, muscles regaining coordination day by day, and quietly asked, "Who gets to decide what counts as meaningful?" The balance of public opinion began to tip. The Dominion took a more direct approach. On the enforcement flagship, Vurkash's representatives, furious at the leaks and the evolving narrative, persuaded the captain to authorize technical disruption measures, a virus, carefully hidden in a hardware update long ago, lay dormant in the Lazarus Array's control systems. It had been installed when the Dominion had offered assistance in refurbishing the old station. No one on the human side had noticed. Now, with a short encrypted burst, it awoke. In Control Sector 2, lights flickered, grav plating hiccuped, whole panels rebooted. Bogdan, in a crawl space knee-deep in cables, frowned. "Did you schedule a firmware patch now?" he asked his subordinates. "No," one replied. "Systems are cycling on their own." On the main power grid, a cascade began. Safeties tripped, then failed. Load-balancing algorithms that had been patched and repatched buckled under the sudden malicious flood. Gravity spiked briefly in some wards, then vanished in others. Lights went out, monitors died, patients, mid-treatment, found themselves tumbling. In Ward 7, Nirael's bed lifted, drifting toward a suddenly opened maintenance hatch where pressure was dropping. A klaxon blared. Amaka lunged, fingers snatching at the bed frame. She missed. Nirael's eyes went wide. A figure in a human medic's uniform hurled himself off a counter, body slamming into Nirael's, pushing her sideways. His outstretched hand caught a safety rail. The bed slammed against the edge of the hatch. Emergency shutters slammed down a heartbeat later, crushing the medic's arm in the gap. He screamed, then choked as atmosphere whooshed past him into the small volume that had vented. Farah, monitoring the crucible, saw pressure drops and screamed for seals. Her team rerouted the printer's output from therapy tissues to emergency sealant mats, shoving half-finished organs aside. She sprinted through half-lit corridors, passing Grumek and his bewildered Droshkan, who had slammed their own gauntlets down on manual overrides to close doors and prevent others from being sucked into space. They had not expected this. Their orders had never included killing patients or destroying the station. Some of them had relatives in similar wards elsewhere. Grumek bellowed into his command channel for clarity. Thalqar Command replied only, "Maintain position. Interference with enforcement measures is unauthorized." His ridges flared in disgust. In Control, Bogdan tore open panels, overriding the virus-driven routines with manual brute force commands. "Kill this!" he roared at the ancient core. "You don't get to die on me now, you rusted coffin." He shut off large sections of the station's automation, switching back to laborious manual control loops that would keep grav and air on in critical sections and leave others dark. It was a triage of systems, mirroring the clinical triage happening in wards. Ilias led a team into the primary command nexus, cutting physical uplink lines that the virus was using as conduits. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the room. He coughed, eyes stinging, but his hands were steady. Across the station, human and allied staff worked alongside reluctant Droshkan boarders to stabilize the chaos. Some Droshkan pulled patients away from failing equipment on pure reflex. Others stared, conflicted, at the carnage their employers had caused. Cameras caught the moments when humans applied their most advanced tools not to weapons or defenses, but to save injured enemies. In one hull breach, Farah arrived to find a Droshkan trooper pinned under a collapsed beam, bleeding heavily from a torn exosuit and shattered ribs. Her rational mind said, "He boarded us to take our patients. We owe him nothing." Her training said, "He is dying, and you can help." She slapped portable biogel from an adapted crucible cartridge over his wounds, ignoring his snarled protest that he had not authorized human meddling. The gel foamed, forming a temporary ribcage scaffold and sealing leaking vessels. "This is not for you," she muttered. "It's for the people watching." He did not catch the words. He would later remember only that he had expected pain and cold, and instead felt warmth and slowing fear. On the Thalqar flagship, Vurkash's representative watched the unfolding footage with horror. They had wanted a clean system failure that could be blamed on human incompetence, not a messy near catastrophe where their virus was exposed by the response. Concord observers had already detected anomalous code signatures in the sabotage. They had traced its origin with appalling speed. Public feeds lit up with diagrams of the Dominion's hidden kill switch. The political tide, carefully managed until then, turned into a wave. Delegates who had been hedging now received impossible-to-ignore messages from their populations. Some had personal reasons to shift. A few had already recognized their own lost siblings and parents among the healed. a crucial vote was called. In a packed council chamber, with the stars of 1,000 systems projected overhead, the Oriones Concord adopted a resolution by a margin that would have been unthinkable even a week before. The legal category of terminal biomatter for sapient origin cases was revoked. Contracts relying on that classification were declared void going forward. Sapients previously sold under those terms were to be recognized as full persons with rights, retroactively. The resolution was messy, full of loopholes and exceptions to be litigated for years. But its core was clear. The practice that had filled Lot Omega was no longer sanctioned. Vurkash's advisor delivered the news in a small, damp voice. "The Council has withdrawn its recognition," the Avatar said. "Our acquisitions are being challenged on all fronts. Insurance underwriters are backing away. Our credit lines." Vurkash tuned him out. His carefully constructed world, based on reclassifications and euphemisms and carefully cultivated gray zones, was collapsing. He made one last, desperate attempt to salvage something. "Trigger the secondary measure," he ordered. The advisor hesitated. "We already, the failsafe," Vurkash hissed. "Destroy the evidence. If we cannot keep the assets, we can at least deny them to the humans." But the virus had already burned itself out. The manual overrides on Lazarus refused further intrusion. The only failsafe left was open violence. The Thalqar enforcement captain, now facing a Concord resolution that made any overt attack on the array legally suicidal, refused. "I will not fire on a station full of recognized persons under Concord observation," she said. "We are already tainted by this sabotage. I will not be your executioner." She cut the connection. Vurkash's ridges flickered, then went dark. He would later be arrested under Concord warrants, scapegoated by his own peers to salvage what they could of their reputation. He knew it, even then. Back at Lazarus, systems slowly stabilized. Grav returned to normal. Air flowed steadily. Lights brightened, a little more humble, a little more flicker-prone, but persistent. In Ward 7, Nirael sat up, clutching her head. "Is it over?" she asked. Amaka, arm in a sling, smiled crookedly. "This part is," she said. News of the Concord resolution arrived like a cool wind after fever. Some on the human side celebrated. Most were too tired. They had patience to move, systems to patch, arguments still to win on the ground. In the weeks that followed, the Lazarus Array was formally declared a neutral medical sanctuary. Administration would be shared between representatives of the healed species and human staff. The resolution included language, barring its use for military staging. Humans did not keep ownership of Liireth, Nirael, or any of the others. That would have violated everything they had just fought for. Instead, they offered training. "We can't staff every sanctuary that will be needed," Neha said to a gathered group of recovered patients in a bright makeshift lecture hall. "We can't even answer every call we're getting now, but you can." She looked at Liireth, whose fine motor control had improved enough that she could demonstrate gentle rehabilitation exercises for fellow Halsey. She looked at Nirael, who had begun helping younger children through their own post-operative pain. "You know what it feels like to be written off," Neha said. "You can look someone in the eye and say, 'I have been where you are.' That makes you better healers than most of us already." Some of them were afraid. They had spent their last conscious months expecting to die, not be offered a profession. Others leaned forward, hungry. On ESS Samaritan, docked briefly at Lazarus for resupply, Captain Ilias Marko stood alone in a quiet observation blister, watching ships arrive and depart. Some bore the markings of worlds that had once fed the Dominion's repurposing programs. Now they arrived under new flags, carrying their own hopeless cases, hoping for alternatives. He thought of the title line on Lin's first report to Earth: acquisition and attempted rescue of 80,000 terminal patients. He thought of the cost, the treasury outlays, the political capital spent, the lives lost in the sabotage, despite all their efforts. He weighed them against Liireth's faltering laughter in a therapy pool, against Nirael racing other children down a corridor, her steps firm. He weighed them against the quiet flood of messages that kept arriving from Earth. "How can we help? What cases need attention? Can you send us more data?" He knew there would be backlash. There would be human voices arguing that they had overreached, that Earth could not be the galaxy's conscience without bleeding itself dry. He also knew that something fundamental had shifted. Humans had shown the wider galaxy that terminal could mean worth trying anyway. They had shared their methods, infecting other societies with the idea that it might be crueler to give up than to fail. It was a kind of contagion, one he was proud to spread. Behind him, the door hissed open. Linh entered, a cup of bitter tea in hand. She looked as tired as he felt. "New calls for help," she said, without preamble. "Worlds where non-productive citizens disappear quietly, mining colonies that sell injured workers to debt harvesters. It's a lot." Ilias nodded. "We can't answer them all," he said. "No," Linh said. She sipped. "But we can answer some. And we can teach others to answer more." She handed him a small pad. On it, a list of names scrolled: Liireth, Nirael, and hundreds of others who had signed up for the first cohort of cross-species medical training. They insisted, she said. "Some of them are putting off going home to do this. Their families think they're mad." Ilias smiled faintly. "They'll fit right in," he said. Far below, in one of the newly established teaching wards, Liireth demonstrated a series of gentle stretches to a mixed group of patients and trainees. Her motions were still slower than they had been before her illness, but there was a grace in them that made her watchers fall silent. "This," she said, "is what it feels like when you are not being harvested, when every movement is yours." Nirael, standing by, translated the sentiment into several languages, stumbling over some words, but getting the spirit across. Around them, the hum of the station changed. What had once been an industrial frame, and then a near tomb, was now something else entirely. A place built on the premise that until a life truly ended, it was not to be carved up for parts, but fought for. And somewhere else in the galaxy, a young researcher received a strange set of scans from a remote world, tagged with a simple note: "Local doctors say they are beyond help. We no longer accept that answer. Can you advise?" She smiled, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work.